house sat on a lonely stretch of road, the kind of place people avoided without ever knowing why. It had been there for over a century, watching as the town grew and changed, as people came and went. But no one ever stayed near it for long. Locals whispered about its past. Some called it cursed. Others refused to speak of it at all. There were stories of those who had entered and never walked out. Of strange figures glimpsed in the upper windows, where no living person stood. Of screams in the dead of night, swallowed by the walls. Most ignored the warnings. They thought it was just another old legend, a tale meant to scare children. But those who dared to enter, learned the truth.
I am coming for you.
It was October when James Holloway arrived in town. He wasn't from around here. Just passing through. A journalist, looking for forgotten places, untold stories. He had heard about the house in a roadside diner, where an old man warned him to stay away. "Don't go near it," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You listening? People disappear there. Things move when they shouldn't." James laughed it off. He'd heard stories like this before. Ghost towns, haunted houses, it was always the same. A crumbling building, a few local rumors, and a history people were too afraid to dig into. But fear made for good stories. So that night, as the sky turned dark and the wind carried a chill that sunk deep into the bones, he found himself standing before the house. The windows were black and empty, staring at him like vacant eyes. The front door hung slightly open, like it had been waiting for him. He hesitated, just for a moment. Then, with his camera in one hand and his flashlight in the other, he stepped inside. Inside, the air was thick. Stale. It smelled of damp wood and something else, something faint but unmistakable. James scanned the room with his flashlight. Dust floated in the beam, swirling as if disturbed by something unseen. The furniture was covered in white sheets, their shapes distorted in the dim light. The house was silent. Too silent. No dripping pipes, no distant creaks, just an unnatural stillness, as if the building itself was holding its breath. He raised his camera, pressing record. October 13th, 11:47 p.m., he whispered. Inside the Holloway house. Locals say this place is haunted. Let's see if they're right. The flashlight flickered. Just for a second. Barely noticeable. But when the light stabilized, something had changed. The sheets covering the furniture had shifted. Only slightly, like something had brushed past them. James frowned, adjusting his grip on the camera. He turned toward the staircase. The wooden steps loomed ahead, leading into complete darkness. And then, from above, a single, deliberate footstep. James hesitated, staring up the stairs. "Hello?" he called, his voice barely above a whisper. No response. Another footstep. This time, closer. James's breathing quickened. He adjusted his grip on the flashlight and forced himself to move. One step. Then another. Each creak of the wooden stairs sent a chill up his spine. Halfway up, he stopped. The door at the end of the hallway was slightly open. Inside, something moved. A shadow, just a glimpse, a flicker of motion. Then, a voice. Not loud. Not angry. Just a whisper. You shouldn't be here. James's breath caught in his throat. He swung the flashlight toward the door. And for the briefest moment, he saw it. Not a person. Not an animal. Something else. It stood just beyond the doorway, watching. No eyes. No face. Just the suggestion of something human, twisted and wrong. Then. James Holloway was never seen again. His camera was found outside the house, covered in dust. The last recorded footage. A single frame, blurred, dark, but unmistakable. A figure standing in the doorway, waiting. The Holloway house still stands. People pass by, but no one stops. No one dares enter. Because those who do, never leave. You shouldn't be here.
I am coming for you.
It was October when James Holloway arrived in town. He wasn't from around here. Just passing through. A journalist, looking for forgotten places, untold stories. He had heard about the house in a roadside diner, where an old man warned him to stay away. Don't go near it, the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. You listening? People disappear there. Things move when they shouldn't. James laughed it off. He'd heard stories like this before. Ghost towns, haunted houses, it was always the same. A crumbling building, a few local rumors, and a history people were too afraid to dig into. But fear made for good stories. So that night, as the sky turned dark and the wind carried a chill that sunk deep into the bones, he found himself standing before the house. The windows were black and empty, staring at him like vacant eyes. The front door hung slightly open, like it had been waiting for him. He hesitated, just for a moment. Then, with his camera in one hand and his flashlight in the other, he stepped inside. Inside, the air was thick. Stale. It smelled of damp wood and something else, something faint but unmistakable. James scanned the room with his flashlight. Dust floated in the beam, swirling as if disturbed by something unseen. The furniture was covered in white sheets, their shapes distorted in the dim light. The house was silent. Too silent. No dripping pipes, no distant creaks, just an unnatural stillness, as if the building itself was holding its breath. He raised his camera, pressing record. October 13th, 11:47 p.m., he whispered. Inside the Holloway house. Locals say this place is haunted. Let's see if they're right. The flashlight flickered. Just for a second. Barely noticeable. But when the light stabilized, something had changed. The sheets covering the furniture had shifted. Only slightly, like something had brushed past them. James frowned, adjusting his grip on the camera. He turned toward the staircase. The wooden steps loomed ahead, leading into complete darkness. And then, from above, a single, deliberate footstep. James hesitated, staring up the stairs. Hello, he called, his voice barely above a whisper. No response. Another footstep. This time, closer. James's breathing quickened. He adjusted his grip on the flashlight and forced himself to move. One step. Then another. Each creak of the wooden stairs sent a chill up his spine. Halfway up, he stopped. The door at the end of the hallway was slightly open. Inside, something moved. A shadow, just a glimpse, a flicker of motion. Then, a voice. Not loud. Not angry. Just a whisper. You shouldn't be here. James's breath caught in his throat. He swung the flashlight toward the door. And for the briefest moment, he saw it. Not a person. Not an animal. Something else. It stood just beyond the doorway, watching. No eyes. No face. Just the suggestion of something human, twisted and wrong. Then. James Holloway was never seen again. His camera was found outside the house, covered in dust. The last recorded footage. A single frame, blurred, dark, but unmistakable. A figure standing in the doorway, waiting. The Holloway house still stands. People pass by, but no one stops. No one dares enter. Because those who do, never leave. You shouldn't be here.
James Holloway disappeared, but he wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last, because the Holloway house wasn't the only one. It was part of something bigger, something ancient, something alive. Carter Hayes had spent decades searching for answers, for a way out, for a way to undo what he had done. He had visited over a dozen houses, each one different, but all connected by the same unnatural presence. And each house had claimed someone. 1974, Louisiana. A man named Daniel Coombs entered an abandoned plantation house. He walked inside. He never walked out. 1981, Oregon. A young woman named Lillian Pierce went into an old mining cabin in the woods. She was never seen again. 1996, Pennsylvania. A family moved into a Victorian home outside of Pittsburgh. One by one, they vanished, until only their youngest son remained, staring at a mirror that no longer reflected his face. The pattern was undeniable, but Carter had found something else. Something worse. The houses weren't just taking people. They were replacing them. If you find a Holloway house, remember these rules. Rule number 1. Never enter alone. The house doesn't want just one. It wants an exchange. Rule number 2. Never look in the mirrors. That's not your reflection. It's something wearing your face. Rule number 3. Never answer the whispers. They will say your name. They will sound like someone you know. But once you respond, you've invited them in. Rule number 4. If the door is open, do not go inside. If it's waiting for you, that means it's hungry. Carter had broken every single rule, and he had paid the price. James Holloway was still out there, but he wasn't the same. Carter had seen this before. A person leaves a Holloway house, but they don't leave alone. At first, it's little things. The reflection that moves a second too slow. The shadow that stretches just a little too far. The whispers that come from places no one is standing. Then, they start losing time. Waking up in rooms they don't remember entering. Seeing places in their dreams, places that shouldn't exist. And then, the final stage. They fade. Not all at once. Not like a sudden disappearance. Piece by piece. One day, they'll look in the mirror and realize their face isn't their own anymore. They'll hear their voice, but it won't come from their mouth. And one night, they'll go to sleep and wake up inside the house. The Holloway houses weren't accidents. They were doorways. And someone or something had built the first one. Carter's research led him to a name, Elias Holloway, a 19th century occultist, a man obsessed with mirrors, doorways, and reflections that shouldn't be there. He had built the first house in 1871, not to live in, but to trap something inside. Something old, something hungry. The house had been abandoned for decades, but it was never empty. And over the years, more houses appeared. No one built them. They just showed up, waiting for the next visitor. If you see a house that shouldn't be there, if the door is slightly open, if something inside calls your name, do not go in, because if you do, you will never truly leave. It's happening again. Somewhere, right now, someone is seeing a house that wasn't there yesterday. And soon, someone will step inside. Will it be you? Would you survive a Holloway house? There are places in this world where the rules of reality break down, where time bends, where shadows move on their own, where the walls whisper, and once you enter, you don't leave the same. James Holloway disappeared, but Carter Hayes? Carter stayed, and what happened to him was worse than death. I've made a mistake. I stayed too long. I asked too many questions, and now I hear them everywhere. Carter had spent years studying the Holloway houses. He had walked through doorways that shouldn't exist, stared into mirrors that didn't reflect what was really there. And the more he searched for answers, the more the houses noticed him. He thought he was being careful. He never entered alone. He never answered the whispers. He never looked at his reflection for too long. But the houses have another rule, one that's never written down, one that no one talks about. If you keep looking for them, one day, they will come looking for you. Carter woke up one night, and the door to his apartment was slightly ajar. He didn't leave it open. He stepped outside. The hallway was wrong. Too long. Too dark. And at the far end, a doorway stood open. A house he had never seen before. But it had been waiting for him. And this time, he had no choice but to go inside. Carter stepped through the doorway. The moment he did, the door behind him slammed shut. He turned back. There was no door. No way out. Only the house. And it was endless. Every hallway led to another. Every door opened into more darkness. And the whispers, they weren't coming from inside the house. They were coming from inside him. Then, he saw the mirror. There was no reflection. Only a doorway. And something was crawling out of it. The last thing Carter ever recorded was this. They don't want to kill you. They want to make you one of them. The tape cut off. Carter Hayes was never seen again. But in a house somewhere, a door still stands open. And if you step through it, you might hear him whispering your name. Carter wasn't wrong. The Holloway houses are everywhere. And each one has its own story. Each one takes something different. Black Hollow House, Massachusetts, 1903, a mansion that only appears during full moons. Anyone who steps inside is found outside the next morning. Eyes hollow, mouths stretched into silent screams. No one knows what they saw. The Wilkes Motel, Arizona, 1978, a roadside motel where time doesn't move. People check in but never check out. The rooms are always full, but no one ever sees the guests. The Tanglewood Cabin, Alaska, 1994, a cabin deep in the woods. Hunters and hikers stay the night, but when they wake up, they're not alone. Their voices echo twice. Their reflections move too slow, and by morning, they vanish. And the worst one of all, the original Holloway house. The one Elias Holloway built in 1871. The one that started it all. The one where James Holloway disappeared. And now, someone is going back inside. James Holloway's story isn't over. Somewhere, deep inside the first house, he is still there. Trapped, waiting, but not helpless. There's one thing no one ever tried before. One thing that might break the houses. What happens when someone fights back? What happens when someone refuses to be taken? There's a ritual. One Elias Holloway wrote down before he vanished. A way to close the doorways forever. But it requires a sacrifice. A trade. Someone must take James's place. Someone must go into the house willingly. And never come back. One last chance to escape. One last chance to end this. But can it really be stopped? Or is the Holloway cursed unstoppable? What would you do? Would you enter the Holloway house to save James? Or would you let the door stay open, waiting for the next visitor? You think you understand the Holloway houses? You don't. This isn't just a haunting. This isn't just an urban legend. It's something older, something that has been feeding for centuries. And now, it's awake. Elias Holloway wasn't just a man. He was an architect of the unknown, a scholar of reflections, a man obsessed with doorways. In 1871, he built the first house, not as a home, but as a trap, because Elias Holloway knew something no one else did. There are things that exist beyond our world, and sometimes they try to slip through. Elias tried to stop them. He thought if he built the perfect house, a house designed to contain them, he could keep them locked away forever. He was wrong. The house didn't imprison them. It connected to them. And from that moment on, the Holloway house wasn't just a building. It was a doorway, one that would never close. The rules no one knew. Carter thought he knew all the rules. Never enter alone. Never answer the whispers. Never look into the mirrors. But Elias left behind a warning that no one ever found. Because the real rules are worse. Rule number 1. The houses don't appear at random. They appear for you. If you see one, it's already chosen you. Rule number 2. If you dream of the house, it's too late. You are already inside. Rule number 3. The people who go missing never really disappear. They just change. Rule number 4. If you hear your name in the dark, do not run. Do not speak. Do not move. Because if you do, it will know you are listening. Elias never broke the rules. Until one night, he heard something calling his name, and he answered. No one ever saw Elias Holloway again, but the house still stands. Waiting. Carter was the last person who tried to stop the Holloway houses. He thought he could figure out how to break the curse. He was wrong. The houses had already claimed him. He just didn't know it yet, because Carter never really left. After he disappeared, his old tapes kept showing up, but there was a problem. The voice on the recordings, it wasn't his anymore. Someone found Carter's journal. The last thing he wrote was this: there is no way out, but there is a way in, and once you step inside, you belong to them. Carter Hayes is gone, but sometimes late at night, people still hear his voice. Not on old recordings, but in the dark corners of their own homes, calling their name. The only way to end this is to go back. Back to the first house. Back to where it all started. Someone has to go inside. Someone has to face what's waiting in the dark. James Holloway is still in there. But is he still James? Or has he become one of them? The plan is simple. Find James. Find the source of the curse. Destroy the house. But nothing is ever that easy. Because as soon as the door closes behind them, they realize the house has been waiting. It knows they are here. And this time, it won't let them leave. The next Holloway house is already out there, waiting for its next visitor, waiting for you. Would you step inside? Or would you run? Would you enter the Holloway house? Do you believe the missing people are still in there waiting? Tell us in the comments. The final nightmare. Darkness. A single breath. Then another. Too many breaths. Something else is breathing with you. The Holloway houses don't just haunt you. They don't just take you. They replace you. And by the time you notice something is wrong, you're already gone. The house that never ends. The final Holloway house has no address, no foundation, no walls. It exists in whispers and mirrors, in memories that don't belong to you. And once you see it, it sees you. No one has ever found the last Holloway house, because the moment they do, they are erased, like they never existed. But sometimes, late at night, if you listen closely, you can still hear them, knocking, begging to be let out. James Holloway was never alone. James Holloway wasn't the first, and he wasn't the last, because something was already inside the house before him. something old, something starving. Elias Holloway built the house to contain it. But James let it out. That's why no one ever found his body. Because James isn't dead. James isn't James anymore. And when the investigators found him in the basement, they didn't realize it wasn't him. Until it smiled. What happens when you break the rules? Carter Hayes thought he could break the curse. He thought he could win. So he broke the rules. He looked into the mirror. He spoke to the voices. He answered the knocking. And for a while, nothing happened. Days passed. Weeks. And then one night, Carter walked into his kitchen and saw himself sitting at the table. The next morning, Carter was gone, but his reflection stayed behind. And every night, at exactly 3:33 a.m., it steps out. The last Holloway house is different. It doesn't just take you. It doesn't just replace you. It turns you into something else. The people who go missing, they aren't dead. They're still inside. They become the house. The creaking floorboards, that's someone trying to move. The whispering wind, that's someone screaming. The shadows in the corners, they aren't shadows. They are watching, waiting for you to look away. Because the moment you blink, they switch places with you. There is no escape. The investigators thought they burned the house down. They thought they destroyed it. But the Holloway house isn't a place. It's a thing. And things like this don't die. They move. They grow. And now, when people vanish, they don't just disappear. They are rewritten. Their families forget them. Their pictures vanish from old albums. Their voices fade from old recordings. Like they never existed. But sometimes, just before they're gone completely, they call someone they love. And if you ever get a call late at night, from a number you don't recognize, and a voice says your name, don't answer. Because if you do, you're next. What would you do if you woke up and your reflection wasn't moving? Would you run? Or would you listen to what it has to say? Tell us in the comments. And if you think this was terrifying, the next story is even worse. The last night, you were warned, but you kept listening. And now, it's too late. The Holloway house knows you. And once it knows you, it never lets you go. The last survivor. Where did he go? There was one man. One who got out. Or at least, that's what people thought. His name was Daniel Whitaker. He was a journalist. A skeptic. A man who didn't believe in ghosts. Until he stepped inside a Holloway house. And when he walked back out, something else came with him. The night Daniel started to change. At first, it was small things. Objects weren't where he left them. His voicemail was full of messages he didn't remember recording. His own voice, whispering, "I don't want to be here anymore. It's not me. Help me." Then, his friends started noticing. His smile was wrong. His eyes never blinked. And the final sign? Daniel Whitaker stopped casting a shadow. Because he wasn't Daniel anymore. Whatever left that house in his skin wasn't human. They say the Holloway houses take you. But that's not the truth. The truth is so much worse. Because the houses don't just consume you. They wear you. Like a puppet. Like a suit of skin. And once it takes your place, no one ever notices. Your family won't realize. Your friends won't suspect it. Because it remembers everything about you. How you talk. How you move. How you dream. It becomes you. And the real you, the one trapped inside the house, you're left behind. Alone. Forever. What happens to the ones left behind? They never die. They should. They want to. But death is a mercy the Holloway house doesn't allow. Instead, they rot. Their skin sloughs away, but they don't bleed. Their bones twist, but they don't break. Their voices fade, but they still scream. And the worst part, they remember everything. They know who they were. They know what they lost. And they know that outside, something else is living their life. Something that looks like them. Something that smiles a little too wide. Something that will come for you next. The last Holloway house, where it all ends. A map. The red dots keep multiplying. Then, one by one, they vanish, until only one remains. They say there's one final house. The first one, the one Elias Holloway built to contain whatever was inside. But no one has ever found it, because the moment you step too close, it steps closer to you, and when you finally see it, it's already inside you. There is no burning it down. There is no breaking the curse. There is no stopping what's coming, because it's already happening. The Holloway houses are spreading, not in abandoned streets, not in ghost towns, in places you know, in places you trust, in your neighborhood, in your city, in your home. And the next time you open a door, you don't remember closing. The next time you hear something moving in the dark, the next time you see your reflection blink just a little too late, ask yourself, are you still you? Or did the Holloway house take your place? There's nothing left to say, nothing left to do, because once you hear the story, it already knows who you are. You might have seen it before. A house you don't remember walking past. A door that was open when you swore it was locked. A whisper calling your name when no one was there. So, tonight, when you turn off the lights, listen, because if you hear something moving just outside your bedroom door, if you hear the faintest sound of knocking, and if, in the silence, you hear your own voice whisper back, don't open the door, because if you do, you'll never be you again.